Hype. Hype makes the world go round, don't you know? But what happens when a game gets a ton of hype and then doesn't live up to it? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Gameranx, 20 overhyped games that were actually mediocre. Starting off with number 20, it's the Callisto Protocol. Easy to forget because the game basically disappeared the moment it actually came out, but leading up to its release, there was a ton of hype for the Callisto Protocol. When the game was announced, Dead Space was a dead franchise, fondly remembered but ignored by its publisher EA, so the promise of a spiritual successor got people pretty excited. The initial trailers were impressive and the game had a solid pedigree. It wasn't just some yahoos making a Dead Space-like game. It was Glenn Schofield, the architect of the original Dead Space game. He didn't direct it, he was just the executive producer, but the pre-release marketing pushed his involvement hard, and we all bought into it. Finally, a real follow-up to Dead Space. Then an actual Dead Space remake was announced, and it stole all the game's thunder. That, and the game really wasn't that great. It wasn't horrible, the visuals were super impressive, but the weird focus on melee combat, the short length, and the extreme linearity kind of dumbed down what it should have been. It was not what people expected. It looks like Dead Space in some superficial ways, but the Callisto Protocol was no Dead Space. Moving on to number 19, it's Watch Dogs. Whenever you're transitioning from one gaming generation to another, there's always going to be a lot of hype. The jump from Xbox 360 to Xbox One and PlayStation 3 to 4 had to be big. It had to be a monumental shift in games as we know them. If there was one game that ended up being a lightning rod for all those hopes and dreams about next gen, it was Watch Dogs. The first trailer, something we have relitigated many times, was stunning and total BS. We didn't know at the time, at least the less cynical among us didn't, so the hype just kept building. Ubisoft games were already seen as being formulaic at the time, but it seemed like it was going to be something different. The game got glowing write-ups, and it was the most pre-ordered game for the 8th generation of video game consoles. Then reviews started coming out, and people started playing it, and yeah, you know the rest of the story. Here's the thing. Watch Dogs isn't terrible or anything, even mediocre. I know this is a mediocre games list. I think that Watch Dogs is a pretty good game, actually, but compared to what we were shown, it was a pretty big letdown, and regardless of how over many years people have come to appreciate it for what it is, when it came out, it absolutely, under no circumstance, lived up to the hype that Ubisoft had generated for it. It was a good-looking game, but not the amazing-looking one that the trailer's shown. The whole hacking gimmick wasn't really that detailed or super interesting. It was kind of surface level. I'm not saying I hate it, but it's mostly just a well-made GTA clone that played pretty well, but wasn't really doing anything special. Compared to what we were promised, it was mediocre. The hype around the game was that it was basically a genre-defining masterpiece, and if it's not that, of course there's going to be some backlash. It dings you. Doesn't matter how good the game is. It dings you. At number 18 is Homefront. Whenever a company tries to generate a vast transmedia empire out of nowhere, the results tend to crash and burn. It's why they don't do it that often, and when it works, it's kind of amazing. But it doesn't usually work. Homefront, perfect example. It wasn't just going to be the next big Call of Duty killer. It was going to be the next big thing, period. They put out a book before release. They brought in a big Hollywood screenwriter, John Milius, I think is how to say his last name. But they brought him in to bring the story credibility. They launched a massive marketing campaign to get people hyped for this thing. And I don't think I knew anyone who was actually hyped. I remember ads for Homefront popping up everywhere. The game was unavoidable in the weeks leading up to its release, but, let's say the idea of some competition for Call of Duty, fine, good. But the premise of this thing was absolutely absurd. It's about the United States getting invaded and taken over by North Korea, of all places, which, as you know, is a very small country that, although, yeah, sure, they have a military, but whatever you do or don't think about North Korea, their military could be absolutely stepped on by the United States military, or basically any superpower's military for that matter. Anyway, in order to justify this insane turn of events, they basically have to twist world history into an unrecognizable knot, just to do a blatant Red Dawn ripoff story, which wouldn't even matter if the gameplay was good, but at least in the campaign, it was just a showcase of what not to do in a Call of Duty campaign.
Transport heli!
More the fuckers roping in! Don't leave those frags lying around.
Stay down!
It's slow and clunky and boring in ways its inspiration just isn't. The multiplayer was solid, had some good ideas, but the overall package was mediocre at best. Now the only thing anyone remembers about the series is that they hit all of Time Splitters 2 in the sequel, which is cool. I don't hate it, but like, Homefront isn't good because it has a different game in it. THQ was so desperate to generate a Battlefield or a Call of Duty like hit. They wanted to play at the big boys' table, but instead they just drove themselves out of business, making junk like this.
This fight, Jacob, start shooting!
2 of them, coming over the fence!
Aim for the head, make every bullet count!
And number 17 is Mighty Number 9. The gaming world was in a very different place when the original Kickstarter for Mighty Number 9 came out. Now, no one would care about that original pitch video. Oh, a throwback Mega Man game? Toss that into the pile with the dozen that are coming out constantly. And I mean, we've got 30XX now. There's literally no reason, except for if they made a new Mega Man or Mega Man X game. If you want to play a Mega Man style game, particularly Mega Man X, hit up Steam, go straight to 30XX. God, that game is good. But back then, there wasn't a 30XX. I don't even think 20XX was out at that point. But the entire hype around Mighty Number 9 feels really stupid in hindsight. But people were legitimately excited about Mighty Number 9 at first. The Kickstarter, which was major gaming crowdfunding campaigns, ended up raising over $4 million. And it got people talking. At that time, a lot of people were pretty unhappy with how Capcom was handling the Mega Man franchise, and at least during the Kickstarter, it was framed as hero Kenji Inafune coming and taking on Goliath, the monster Capcom, who just didn't let the man make the Mega Man game that he always wanted to make. The real story of Mega Man's decline as a franchise is a lot more complicated than that, and it doesn't really matter because he's only credited as the writer of the game. He had almost nothing else to do with it, so it was really just a cynical attempt to attach a major name for publicity purposes. And it's another one of those games where they tried to create a media empire before it came out. They were talking about manga and TV shows. They tried to push another game called Red Ash before this one was even done, and it only made the backers more frustrated with the slow pace of development. When the game finally came out, it wasn't great. It certainly wasn't the worst thing ever. It was just some random indie game with no expectations.
That's more like it. Testing, check 1, check 2, sibling.
It probably would have had a better reputation, but it's not that. And also, it really isn't a great game. Certainly, it does have its moments. Some of the boss fights are really good, but it's only some of them. Most of them are pretty generic and not really anything to care about. I mean, if you go back to my 7-minute before you buy of the game from back in 2016, I think I said a lot of similar things. I really wanted to like it, but it just wasn't enough. And in that sort of dichotomy, you can see exactly what we're really talking about in this list. The game was hyped for years. It had all these expectations. There was reason to want to like it, but it just didn't live up to any of it. At number 16 is Evolve, coming from the team that made Left 4 Dead. Evolve was going to be the next step in multiplayer gaming. It was talked up to the moon by pretty much everybody who previewed it. Got tons of Best of E3 awards back in 2014. Ton of hype around it. People were legit excited about it, too. It wasn't just false hype generated by the publisher. It's a game that people really wanted to get their hands on and play. So it's kind of a shame that what happened. It's one of those games that previews really well, and then when you play it for a while, problems start to pop up. The final game release just wasn't as polished as something like Left 4 Dead. It was more complicated, but also frustrating in a lot of ways, and the netcode was an absolute mess at launch. They would eventually get the game to a more stable place, but all the problems and excessive microtransactions scared folks away. It's not a terrible game. A lot of people love it, but it never quite managed to get where it needed to be with the gameplay. A full-blown sequel where the team got a chance to really rethink the mechanics and get everything more balanced and polished probably would have been the way to go if they wanted to keep doing Evolve, but that didn't happen. And number 15 is Star Fox Zero. Yeah, a Nintendo game for once. They usually know how to make a good game, but every once in a while they screw up. Star Fox Zero should have been a slam dunk. People loved Star Fox, people were chomping at the bit for a new one, and they hit us with a flashy trailer that revealed that Platinum was making the game. Platinum Games. The Japanese action game studio was in a shaky spot at that point. Their previous games, The Legend of Korra and Transformers Devastation, were real work-for-hire type stuff, but this was only a few years off from Revengeance, and their work with Nintendo had always been pretty high quality, so there's no reason to assume the game wouldn't live up to expectations. The preview footage looked great, but when people actually started playing it and found out how it actually controlled, that sentiment changed, let's say. This game has forced gyroscope aiming. You cannot do it the traditional way. You had to aim by tilting the Wii U screen. Also, critical information was on the gamepad screen, which forced you to divide your attention between the main screen and the gamepad screen in the middle of this frenetic action shooter. I mean, by all accounts, it probably could be a good game if not for the controls. Everything seems to be about right. I mean, if anything, they played it a little bit too safe in terms of the actual content. They just remade Star Fox 64, basically. Instead of doing something new, they basically repeated the winning formula of the old games, which was honestly not enough. Not with those controls, especially. Star Fox 64 was basically a remake of the original Star Fox, so it was a remake of a remake. A Xerox of a Xerox, as one might say. When you get accustomed to the controls, it's not so bad. It does have the platinum polish, but it should have been a lot better, and I think if somebody took the code of the game and rebuilt the mechanics of it, it could actually be a really damn good game. It's just somebody needs to do that. Remove the second screen, remove the gyroscope, bring us traditional controls, that's it. At number 14 is Heavenly Sword. The initial PS3 launch library is pretty dire, so when a game got announced that looked like it was actually next-gen, people stood up and took notice. The two biggest hype generators for the upcoming PS3 were Lair, which got delayed past launch and ended up being almost unplayable because of gyro controls. Almost like that's not a good idea. But Heavenly Sword also got delayed, but it ended up being kind of okay. Like a lot of launch games of this generation and the next, it was all flash and no substance. The campaign was short, completely linear, and full of invisible walls. Combat was simplistic, there were a few gyro gimmicks, and you couldn't even jump. It was no God of War or Devil May Cry, but man, it was a visual spectacle back in the day. That's really all the final product had going for it, though. It was more of a tech demo for the new console rather than a proper game. A walking advertisement for the power of the PS3, which it didn't even really get to do entirely because the game got delayed past the actual launch of the system. Heavenly Sword is a perfect example of the shallowness of 8th generation games, too. It was simplistic, cutscenes were too long, but it is still kind of fun, and Andy Serkis gives it an amusingly unhinged performance as the bad guy, so it's not all bad.
Get this sword away from him!
Kill her.
Next, over at number 13
is Nickelodeon All-Stars Brawl. In 2021, people were really starting to get a little sick of Smash Brothers. I don't know if it was just the hype YouTubers trying to push this one as the next big thing, or if there was really a groundswell of support with fans who really did want a proper alternative to Smash Brothers. But I remember there being a surprising amount of hype for this. And to the developers' credit, they did say all the right things and have previously proven their platform fighting game bona fides with Slap City, one of the only actually decent indie Smash Brothers clones. It's not like the hype came out of nowhere. There was potential here. All those hopes and dreams should have died when we saw the publisher, Game Mill, the guys behind real classics like The Walking Dead, Destinies, and Rise of Kong Skull Island. With them publishing, the game it didn't stand a chance. And it's not like it was terrible, it's just really bare bones. You could tell the developers had the skills to make a good platform fighter, but they didn't have the budget. That's definitely a Game Mill problem. The game lacked interesting game modes, all the characters were completely silent, which is the kind of problem you really can't overcome because half the appeal of the game is seeing the cartoon characters come to life and beat each other up. Final result wasn't a complete disaster, but it was not the Smash Brothers killer that so many hyped it up to in their own heads. Number 12 is The Order 1886. Basically take everything I said about Heavenly Sword, put it here, except for PlayStation 4 rather than 3. It was supposed to be a technical showpiece for the PS4 at launch, got pushed back way past launch, and was released to relative disinterest. We don't think about it much now, but before release, there was a ton of hype around this game. It was consistently mentioned as one of the most anticipated games around that time, and the general enthusiasm around the project was really, really good. It mostly comes down to graphics, which are still actually really impressive even now, but everything else about the game is average. The shooting is basic. It's good, but basic.
Watch yourself.
The story is dull. Very little actually happens. It's got potential. This was essentially the prologue of a game. And if there was a sequel that expanded on the shooting and the story, it could go from a tech demo to some proper games that are actually a good IP. But that didn't happen. Separate from all the hype, is it a good game? Yeah, it's all right. It's pretty good. But it's a generic third-person shooter that just so happens to have incredible-looking environments, especially for the time. And the graphics are really what it has going for it. At number 11 is Haze. Easy to look back and laugh at Haze, the PS3's big Halo killer, but you gotta remember that there was some real talent behind this thing. It was made by Free Radical, the guys behind the Time Splitters series. It was good reason to be excited about the game. Magazines hyped it up hard. Everyone was pumped to play it. In the immortal words of Jonathan Davis of Korn, gaming for me is a religion, and Haze is the shit. Really, PlayStation players were just desperate for something that was Halo-shaped, even vaguely at the time, to come to the shiny black brick, and they put their hopes into what was ultimately a false prophet that let people down and was cast out. It's not a terrible game. Free Radical knows what they're doing with an FPS, but it feels like about a generation out of date. Looks and plays like something from the Xbox PS2 era. And for all the talk of being a Halo killer, it's missing vehicular-based combat, and that's a really big thing. It's basically just another bland FPS with a really goofy campaign, perfectly playable, but not the next Halo, not even the next Halo 5.
May God be with you!
And number 10 is Black and White. Cast your mind back to 2001, to a time when Peter Molyneux's absurd promises, well, a time that we hadn't been through a lot of them already. When he said something, it still held some weight. The man is an expert hype man, especially when the games he made still ended up pretty good, despite how ridiculously overblown his promises were. Originally, I was planning on putting Fable here, bring up some of the classics, like how he said you'd be able to plant a seed and see the tree grow in real time. But for all the false promises he made about Fable, I think the final result is a pretty damn good game, actually. I like the Fable games. But Black and White's legacy is a lot more mixed. It was a really ambitious game with a crazy amount of hype behind it. It was going to revolutionize AI in video games. It was a god game. It didn't have a user interface. It was going to be a whole new kind of game that would change the industry as we knew it. It should come as no surprise that when Black and White did finally come out, it wasn't quite the game Peter and Lionhead promised. It was short, it was shallow, it was very bug. I mean, I will give that it was unique. That is a definite thing that's true. It was a unique game. Ultimately, it's a unique and mediocre game. More of a sandbox than something you can actually play, but it's a hard game to hate despite its many problems. I will say it is unfortunate that that's the kind of game that Peter Molyneux is more associated with now. Something that's got some redeeming stuff to it or something interesting at its core and just doesn't deliver. As opposed to really damn good games like Fable, which, yes, he promised a bunch of absurd crap, but I also really don't care that I can't plant a seed and see a tree grow in real time. I don't watch trees grow in real life, and I don't need it in a game, per se, but yeah. And number 9 is State of Emergency. It cannot be understated how hyped this game was. It was Rockstar's follow-up to Grand Theft Auto 3. That game was an absolute masterpiece, so of course this was going to be good. Hell, it could be better. I don't know if you've ever played State of Emergency. It's been a while since the GTA follow-up era, but it is not better than Grand Theft Auto 3. The gameplay is very simplistic. It's pretty shallow. There just isn't a lot to it. The Warriors was a much better beat-em-up, and it was more fun creating chaos in a Grand Theft Auto game. So State of Emergency just didn't have a lot worthwhile to it. It's, still a fun game to screw around with, but it really feels like some kind of an arcade game that doesn't quite translate into a full console game. Like, it really weirdly has that, like, mid-90s Sega feel, despite it not really coming from that perspective at all. It's one of those games that could have been a lot more. It's fun. It's just not really much of something. And number 8 is Brute Force. Oh, remember Brute Force? Yeah, trick question. Nobody does. But back in 2002, 2003, this was one of the first Halo killers and was getting so much attention. It was one of those games that magazines love to puff up to get people to buy them. Because if you inflate a quote-unquote Halo killer, or really a oppositional thing to any popular thing, you factionalize people. You get an argument. People engage a lot more. It's more interesting. I think we've taken this principle a little bit too far as a society, but that's besides the point. Magazine covers were the original clickbait. They made insane promises that the games themselves could never support. I mean, look at this game. It's nothing like Halo, but that didn't stop magazines from claiming it was going to kill Halo. Like, it's not even trying to compete with Halo. That's not its MO. It's actually a little more interesting than just a Halo clone. It's a weird sci-fi tactical shooter where you control a squad of 4 guys who have unique abilities. You can issue commands and control each character at will. It was a cool idea. The problem was the execution. The controls were clunky. The graphics were... we know what could be done in 2002/2003, and this is not up to par. Commanding your guys, like I said, due to the clunky controls, it was pretty awkward. It gets points for an original idea, and it's good that the game came out because it most likely did inspire good games. Like, innovative ideas in mediocre games often happened in that era, and although nobody really remembers Brute Force, it probably had an impact beyond what anybody really thinks about. And number 7 is the Conduit. The Wii may have been a massive success for Nintendo, but for hardcore gaming enthusiasts, it was just a kiddie toy, not a real console. So fans were always looking for the game that would prove the Wii wasn't some novelty, but had real games for grown-ups, and the Conduit was going to be that game. Look at it. It's got particle effects and normal mapping. Nothing is cel-shaded or playing party games at all. It's an FPS. It's got guns. It's a real game, guys. We swear. People were calling High Voltage the next Rare, like hype was out of control. And I'll tell you why that hype was there. It was just low self-esteem over liking something that had a reputation with the real gamers. The Wii was fine. There's no problem. The Wii was great even. And of course, the final result did not live up to the hype. The game released to mostly middling reviews and a muted fan response. It wasn't terrible, but it was okay. And obviously fans moved on to the next big mediocre FPS to get hyped over because they needed their Wii to be a real gaming console. It was a real gaming console, guys. I hope people have healed since then. And number 6 is The Bouncer. In 2001, any game released by Squaresoft was going to be huge, especially their first game on the highly anticipated PlayStation 2. The Bouncer was going to be a graphical showcase for the system, and people were really hyped for it. We knew next to nothing about it, but with the pedigree of the people like Takashi Tokita, who directed classics like Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger. The director of Chrono Trigger, probably one of the best games ever made, and the artist Tetsuya Nomura. The game was going to be great no matter what, right? The only problem is, well, nobody was working on this game had made an action game before. They were only credited with RPGs, and it shows when you play The Bouncer with its very stiff combat and weird RPG system. They could have just made a solid beat 'em up, but the Bouncer is a weird narrative game hybrid with branching story paths. Too much story, combat doesn't feel that good, camera's infuriating. It's a messy game with a lot of problems. It's not terrible. It's got this Squaresoft charm from the late 90s, early 2000s, but it's nowhere even close to the hype that it had. It was a weird experimental game that is entertaining, but it definitely has its problems. At number 5 is Duke Nukem Forever. First it was hyped, then forgotten about, then it became a laughingstock, then it was hyped again, and the whole process started over. It happened a few times. It took 14 years for the Duke Nukem 3D sequel to finally see the light of day, and in that time it experienced the hype cycle that is usually only reserved for long-running franchises. I mean, Duke Nukem is technically a long-running franchise, but Duke Nukem 3D was the game that people cared about. The most hyped trailer was released way back in 1998, where it was clearly aping Half-Life, but hey, if you're gonna steal from the best, right? Many other revisions of the game came later due to an increasingly muted response from fans. The game was a running joke for a long time. Everyone assumed that it was just never coming out, and then the bombshell dropped. Gearbox acquired the rights, and they were releasing Duke Nukem Forever. Some people were stoked. They went absolutely mental. This game, people had been talking about for 14 years, was finally coming out. It didn't matter if it was going to be good or bad. It was finally coming out, and that was reason enough to be hyped. A lot of people went into this game with boundless goodwill and still walked away disappointed. It's just not a very good game. It's mechanically rote and unengaging. The humor is, let's just say the doses that were included in the original game were relatively small, and at the time of Duke Nukem 3D's release, were also relatively new. When Duke Nukem Forever came out, the expiration date was long past on that kind of humor. It had been done to death, and nobody was really laughing at it.
Excuse me, Duke Nukem? Yeah, my kid's a real big fan. Go on and ask him, Jimmy.
Mr. Nukem, will you sign this for me?
Sure, kid, but I better not find this on eBay.
I want to grow up to be just like you.
Take your pills, vitamins, every day, and you might grow up to be as awesome as me.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Nukem.
Beyond that, the pacing constantly drags. There's long, boring stretches of nothing. I wouldn't call it unacceptably bad, but pretty damn mediocre.
I'm gonna rip your eye out and piss on your brain, you alien dirtbag.
And number 4 is Enter the Matrix. For a brief moment, The Matrix was the biggest thing in Hollywood. The hype around the upcoming sequel, The Matrix Reloaded, was at a fever pitch, and Enter the Matrix wasn't just going to be your generic movie tie-in game, it was going to be part of the story. It had over an hour of original footage, written and directed by the Wachowskis. It had actual characters from the movie in it with the real actors, and the game was going to be an integral part of the entire Matrix franchise. At the time, sounded great. But unfortunately, the game suffered from a lot of the problems movie tie-in games have, particularly at that time. Development was rushed to meet a deadline. This was probably the prime sin of the game. And unfortunately, the final product was a buggy mess. Shiny Entertainment, the guys who made the game, are mostly known for making weird but memorably janky games like Sacrifice and Messiah, games with personality if not polish. That's them at their best, and Enter the Matrix is them at their most time-crunched. The game feels like it's held together by hopes and prayers. It feels like it's going to fall apart at any minute, and it often does. It's a disaster of bugs, but that being said, it does definitely still have its charms. Far from being a definitive Matrix game, everything that you need in a Matrix game is there. It's just a miracle that it works at all, and often doesn't. At At number 3 is Hellgate London, created by former Blizzard employees, many of whom had worked on the Diablo series. Hellgate London really grabbed people's attention with its flashy CGI trailer and an intriguing mix of Diablo-style looting and first-person perspective. It was a looter shooter, probably the first one I can remember, and people were pretty excited about it. Even with it being a subscription-based game, people were hyped. A lot of people even bought the $150 lifetime subscription, which in hindsight maybe wasn't the best value. The game lasted for less than a year before shutting down, and all those lifetime subscriptions just went up in smoke. By then, mainstream interest in the game was well and truly dead. It really wasn't very good. It's got a fun premise and some cool looking classes, but the game is not good to play. It is easy to fall into trap builds that make progress a slog, and you're barely doing any damage. Enemies slaughter you. The only way to survive is tedious grinding, and the environments are just like boring copy-paste crap. It's really hard to want to keep moving through the game for both aesthetic and mechanical reasons. There's a kernel of a good idea here, but it's buried in boring garbage. At number 2 is Spore. It wasn't just going to be the next SimCity. It wasn't just going to be the next Sims. It was going to be an achievement for the ages. A game that transcended the shackles of being a video game and would be something more. The language surrounding Spore was unbelievable, absurd that anyone believed any of it, but it's Maxis. And legendary developer Will Wright, the head of Maxis. Their previous games had revolutionized the industry. Why not this one? And to be fair, the game was ambitious as hell. You start out as a tiny cellular organism and expand all the way to a galactic empire and doing everything in between. The gaming press sung the game's praises. We all speculated about the crazy stuff the game would let us do. Sounded like the ultimate sandbox. It was The Sims, SimAnt, SimCity, all at once. It was gonna be amazing. Instead of that, we got a walking phallus simulator. That's the lasting legacy of Spore, people making dick monsters. Now, to be fair, the alien monster was legitimately impressive, but everything else about the game was far too shallow, and making dick monsters is really funny. Once you've experienced one evolutionary stage, you're pretty much done. There's not really anything else to do. The whole gameplay loop is really simplistic, and it just turns out to be boring. So all that's left to do is see what kind of messed up monster designs, right? Making dick monsters is funny, I said. It's true. And then you got to upload them before EA blocks your account. Spore is like a lot of games on this list where it's got some cool ideas. There's a lot of potential here if they had a chance to expand on the ideas, but they didn't. Spore could have been that era's No Man's Sky if it had gotten the chance, getting constant updates for years that would have added much needed depth to its various systems. But that didn't happen, and what did was just a big disappointment. At number 1 is Advent Rising. When most people talk about Advent Rising, they usually focus on the marketing campaign, the delusions of grandeur from the game's director, the $1 million sweepstakes, the Orson Scott Card involvement, all that stuff. They rarely actually talk about the game itself. It's almost an afterthought to all the chaos surrounding it, and for good reason, because in comparison to everything else, the game just isn't all that interesting. The most unlikely of the many Halo killers, heavy scare quotes on Halo killers, by the way, Advent Rising was dreamed up by a few guys at GlyphX, a studio that made box art and marketing materials for games and nothing else. It was a game literally dreamed up by marketers, and they pushed this thing hard. It was spotlighted in every gaming magazine. It was all over G4 TV. It was everywhere. Most of the hype was manufactured, but there was some legitimate interest around it. The early preview showed at least some potential. The marketing machine behind it was so omnipresent, though, that it was bound to hook at least a few poor saps. You've already heard about this, but every Xbox copy of the game came with a Race for the Truth contest form, where whoever found all of the hidden glyphs in the game first would win $1 million. The only problem here, and something they really should have thought of before doing this contest, is that they had no way of verifying who found the glyphs first. So if you bought this game in hopes of getting $1 million, those hopes are dashed. So I guess you have to actually play it now.
Take him down! Keep back! Die, you bastard!
Not a good game, though. total disaster. There is some real ambitious here, even if it's clearly a chopped up and compromised version of whatever the original vision is. The flick aiming system is really bizarre. The constant matrix dodging is goofy as all hell, but at least the soundtrack's good. Too good for this game. Honestly, it's so bombastic all the time, it feels like someone put it in as a joke. Never has a game with so much money and hype behind it disappeared off the face of the earth like this one. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconHero. We'll see you next time right here on Gameranx.